Have you ever wondered what it truly costs to redraw the map of Europe? The answer is the blood of an entire generation spilled for the ego of one man. This was not merely a series of battles, but a continent-wide slaughter where dysentery, typhus, and gangrene killed 4 times as many men as enemy fire. The retreat from Moscow in 1812 stands as a monument to human misery. Of the 600,000 men who marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. Survivors recounted sleeping inside the warm carcasses of freshly killed horses to escape freezing temperatures that snapped trees in half like twigs. Surgeons performed thousands of amputations in the mud without anesthesia, piling severed limbs like firewood outside their tents, while men screamed until they passed out from shock. The wars consumed roughly 3.5 to 6 million lives, decimating the French male population so severely that the average height of the citizenry actually dropped in the following decades due to the permanent loss of healthy genetic stock. They called it the African World War, but the reality was a silent apocalypse that claimed over 5.4 million lives, the highest death toll since World War II. Imagine a conflict involving 9 sovereign nations and 20 armed groups fighting not just for territory, but for the minerals in your smartphone. The true horror lies in the fact that barely 10% of the victims died from bullets or bombs. The vast majority perished from easily treatable diseases and starvation as militias systematically destroyed hospitals and blocked international aid convoys. In the dense jungles of the DRC, rape was weaponized on a scale never before seen, with hundreds of thousands of women and children brutalized to shatter the social fabric of villages and instill absolute terror. Even today, the Eastern Congo bleeds, a terrifying reminder that the deadliest conflicts are often the ones the world chooses to ignore while consuming the resources they produce. Religious fervor turned Central Europe into a graveyard where the living envied the dead. This conflict reduced the population of the German states by 25% to 40%, a demographic collapse that took centuries to recover. The sack of Magdeburg in 1631 serves as the chilling peak of this madness. Of 30,000 citizens, only 5,000 survived the fire and sword. The destruction was so complete that Magdeburgization became a new word for total annihilation. Armies were essentially traveling cities of locusts that stripped the land bare, forcing desperate peasants to bake bread from sawdust and, in the darkest documented cases, resort to cannibalism. It was a war where soldiers tortured civilians for hidden food stores using the Swedish drink, forcing victims to swallow gallons of sewage water until their stomachs burst. The Peace of Westphalia brought order, but it was built on a foundation of ashes and bones. Following the collapse of the Tsar, Russia descended into a fratricidal nightmare that claimed between 7 and 12 million souls. This was a war of red terror against white terror, where ideology justified the most grotesque cruelties imaginable. The Bolshevik secret police, the Cheka, executed an estimated 200,000 people widely deemed class enemies without trial, often targeting the intelligentsia and clergy. But the bullet was merciful compared to the hunger. The Povolji famine of 1921, triggered by war communism policies and drought, left 5 million dead. Witnesses reported markets selling human flesh and parents killing one child to feed the others. Typhus, thriving in the squalor of trench warfare and refugee camps, killed another 3 million. It was a societal collapse so absolute that the very concept of human value was erased, replaced by a cold, mechanical necessity to survive at any cost in a frozen hellscape. In the remote provinces of Western China, a forgotten holy war resulted in a loss of life that rivals World War I. This uprising of the Hui Muslim minority against the Qing dynasty led to a scorched earth campaign that bordered on genocide. The population of Shanxi province plummeted from 13.9 million to 9.1 million, while Gansu lost nearly 70% of its people. The famous General Zhuo Zongtang ruthlessly suppressed the revolt, employing a strategy of starvation and mass execution known as washing the streets with blood. Entire cities were depopulated, and vital irrigation systems were wrecked, turning fertile farmland into arid wasteland. The sheer scale of the massacre meant that for decades afterward, travelers described the region as a ghostland, where wild wolves roamed through the empty shells of what were once thriving commercial hubs. It remains a stark lesson on how quickly ethnic tension can escalate into total annihilation. The ocean floor is paved with the bones of the Middle Passage. While 12.5 million Africans were shackled and shipped to the New World, nearly 2 million died in transit, their bodies cast into the sea. The horror of the Zong massacre in 1781 encapsulates the cold economics of this tragedy. The crew threw 130 living slaves overboard simply to claim the insurance money for lost cargo. But the death toll extends far beyond the ships. For every captive who made it to the coast, verified historical models suggest another died during the brutal inland raids and forced marches in Africa. The plantation system itself was a machine of attrition, particularly in the Caribbean and Brazil, where the life expectancy of a newly arrived slave was often measured in mere years. This was an industrial-scale theft of humanity that bled a continent dry for 4 centuries, leaving psychological scars that persist to this day. Timur saw himself as the scourge of God, and his campaigns killed an estimated 17 million people, roughly 5% of the world's entire population at the time. His brutality was theatrical and designed to break the psychological will of nations. When the city of Isfahan revolted, he ordered a massacre that resulted in the construction of 28 towers, each built from 1,500 severed heads cemented with clay. In Delhi, he executed 100,000 Hindu prisoners in a single day because they slowed his march. His destruction of the complex irrigation networks in Mesopotamia was so thorough that the region, once the cradle of civilization, did not economically recover until the 20th century. He left a trail of ruined cities from Moscow to Delhi, proving that a single warlord's ambition could turn vast civilizations into dust and silence. His empire collapsed shortly after his death, leaving only a legacy of skulls and ash. The Great War introduced the world to the concept of industrial slaughter. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme alone, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, marching in neat rows into the teeth of German machine guns. But the terror went deeper than the bullet counts. This conflict saw the debut of chemical warfare. Chlorine and mustard gas drowned men on dry land, blistering their skin and melting their lungs. The trenches were cesspools of disease where rats grew as large as cats by feeding on the unburied dead. The war unleashed the Spanish flu, which flourished in the cramped barracks and troopships, eventually killing 50 million people worldwide. It dismantled 4 empires and left a generation of young men physically broken and mentally shattered by the relentless artillery that fell like rain for 4 years. The psychological trauma of shell shock haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. When General An Lushan declared himself emperor, he triggered a catastrophe that brought the glorious Tang dynasty to its knees. The census records from before and after the rebellion show a drop of roughly 36 million people, a figure so staggering that even if partially due to administrative collapse, it implies death on an apocalyptic scale. The siege of Suyang stands as the grisliest chapter. The starving defenders, commanded by Zhang Xun, reportedly resorted to eating 30,000 citizens to sustain the army. Soldiers ate their horses, then the elderly, and finally the women and children. The rebellion devastated the northern economy of China, ending a golden age of poetry and art. It serves as a terrifying historical lesson on how quickly a prosperous, sophisticated society can descend into barbarism when the central authority fractures. The dynasty survived in name only, a shadow of its former glory. Imagine a civil war so deadly it killed more people than World War I. Hong Xiuquan, a failed civil service applicant who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus, led a theocratic uprising that tore China apart. The war claimed between 20 and 30 million lives through combat, famine, and plague. The Taiping forces captured Nanjing and held it for a decade, enforcing strict gender segregation and communal living. The Qing reconquest was merciless. Upon retaking Nanjing, imperial troops slaughtered the entire population, engaging in a frenzy of violence that left the streets choked with corpses. The Yangtze River Delta, the economic heart of the empire, was depopulated. It was a total war where both sides burned crops to starve the enemy, resulting in a humanitarian disaster that permanently weakened the Qing dynasty. The scale of the carnage was so vast that it took the region nearly a century to fully recover its population density. The fall of the Ming dynasty was not a simple change of guard, but a 60-year cataclysm that killed nearly 25 million people. The Manchu invaders faced fierce resistance and responded with genocidal fury. The Yangzhou massacre of 1645 serves as a grim testament. Over 10 days, Qing troops butchered an estimated 800,000 residents, burning the city to the ground. The Q order forced Chinese men to adopt the Manchu hairstyle on pain of death, a policy that led to the execution of tens of thousands who refused to submit. Epidemics of smallpox and bubonic plague followed the armies, finding fertile ground in the famine-stricken populace. The chaotic transition destroyed the agricultural base of China, leading to a period of such profound misery that records describe roads lined with the starving and the dead. It was a demographic disaster that fundamentally altered the trajectory of East Asian history. The Mongol war machine was the most efficient killer the medieval world had ever seen. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, the empire expanded by exterminating entire populations that refused to surrender. During the invasion of Khwarezmia, the Mongols reportedly killed over 1 million people in the city of Merv alone, meticulously beheading the inhabitants to ensure no one survived. The 1258 sack of Baghdad ended the Islamic Golden Age. The invaders threw the contents of the House of Wisdom into the Tigris River, turning the waters black with ink and red with blood. The death toll was so high, estimated at 30 to 40 million, or 11% of the world's population, that forests regrew overpopulated lands, actually cooling the global climate. They utilized biological warfare, catapulting plague victims into besieged cities, and helping to spread the Black Death to Europe. This was a campaign of terror designed to force immediate submission. This was a man-made famine born of hubris and terror. Mao Zedong's campaign to rapidly industrialize China resulted in the death of up to 45 million people. The tragedy was fueled by the Four Pests campaign, where citizens were ordered to kill sparrows. This ecological blunder caused locust populations to explode and devour the crops. Local officials, terrified of reporting failure, inflated harvest figures, leading the state to seize all the grain and leave the farmers with nothing. In the village of Henan, the starvation was so acute that 99% of the population in some communes perished. Archives reveal that 2.5 million of these victims were tortured to death or summarily executed for stealing scraps of food. It remains the deadliest non-wartime event in human history, a grim example of how political ideology can override the basic instinct for survival. The silence surrounding these years masked a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. This event represents the greatest demographic collapse in human history. Before 1492, the Americas were home to an estimated 60 million people. By 1600, 90% of them were dead. While smallpox, measles, and influenza were the primary killers, they were the vanguard of a brutal conquest. The Spanish conquistadors toppled the Aztec and Inca empires, enslaving the survivors in silver mines like Potosi, where the life expectancy was so low that parents maimed their children to keep them from being drafted. In North America, the destruction of the bison and the deliberate distribution of smallpox-infected blankets during Pontiac's War exemplify the systematic eradication of indigenous cultures. Entire civilizations, languages, and histories vanished into silence, leaving behind a hollowed-out continent ripe for settlement. It was a biological and cultural apocalypse that reshaped the genetic makeup of the planet. The world we know today is built on this foundation of mass death. The sheer mathematics of death in World War II defy comprehension. An estimated 70 to 85 million people perished, representing 3% of the world's 1940 population. The horror was industrialized. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Nazi regime perfected a factory system that could murder and cremate 4,400 human beings per day. On the Eastern Front, the battle for Stalingrad alone claimed nearly 2 million casualties, with soldiers fighting for individual rooms in bombed-out buildings. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945 incinerated 100,000 civilians in a single night, boiling the water in the canals. The war ended with the nuclear annihilation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where the shadows of victims were etched into the pavement. It was a conflict of total destruction that targeted civilians as primary military objectives, proving that technology had finally given humanity the power to extinguish itself. The scars of this war are still visible in the geopolitics of our modern world.